Thank you, Brother Raj, Sai Ram, my dear sisters and brothers. I offer my most grateful and prayerful pranams at the lotus feet of our beloved Bhagwan, Sri Sathya Sai Baba. It is always a privilege and an honor to be part of anything done in His name. And therefore, when I say thank you, I mean it from the depths of my heart. It is one of the greatest honors that I get a chance to speak again and again. And I hope and pray that I continue to do this until the last day of my life. So thank you for this opportunity. Bhagwan, Baba, Swami, as we Sai devotees dearly call him. For those of you who may not be familiar with the Sanskrit word Swami, it's an endearing way of calling to one's guru, to one's chosen deity, to one's chosen Lord. It establishes a very personal relationship, very endearingly calling my Lord. So if there is an English translation to it, it just means my Lord, my dear Lord. But like everything else, Swami has a very beautiful, the term Swami has a very beautiful ring to it, a very beautiful sound to it. And for those of us who say it from the depths of the heart, know how divine that word is. And so we refer to Swami through this term as Sai devotees. To me, some of these terms are so precious that I use them very rarely. But today, as I was listening to the 108 names just before this program, this word kept coming again and again. So allow me to use that word, Swami. It almost seems like a dream. 40 years ago, or a little over 40 years ago, I came into the fold of this beloved teacher. I didn't know, I didn't have the slightest hint of what lay ahead in my life. And I'm sure all of you relate to that. One of the nice things about these satsang is when we share our experiences, each one who is listening also go through their own journey in the spiritual path, if you will. And so that's what makes satsangs a participative feeling. That's why we call it satsanga. 40 plus years ago, when I joined Baba's college, I didn't call him Swami then. At least from the heart, I didn't, because everything was so new to me. I had thought I'm going away from spirituality when I was a teenager because I had enough of it, being raised in a very traditional household. But little did I realize that was just the warm-up for the real treat to come, and that was more like a trailer before the real movie began. So I owe it to my parents for their deep spirituality in their lives, for their prayers, for their own sadhana, if you will. That was instilled in my being, my subconscious mind, as we were raised with prayers and devotion in our house. I would owe it entirely to them, to my loving family, for this to have happened, for me to have entered Swami's life. But when it happened, I didn't realize all of this. That's always the case. I think the greatest things happen in our life and we let it pass by because we are too caught up in noticing the nuances of the beauty. Like the sunrise, for example. Most of the audience is sleeping when the sun rises, and yet the sun puts on the most brilliant show every morning, right? So we take a lot of beautiful miracles, like the flowers that bloom in a little pot in your balcony or in your garden. We take it for granted. When a baby smiles, when a baby is born, we take it for granted. But those are the greatest miracles that happen in our lives. And so when great things like this happen, we kind of get caught in the other things that grab our attention in the moment. And then it is only in hindsight, everything appears 2020, as they say. So in hindsight, you look and say, wow, that was a blessed moment. And a part of you wants to go back to relive that moment. But alas, that moment has passed. And so it was that when I was 17 years, the reason for me joining Baba's college was because it was free. My father couldn't afford a residential college for me. He had transferred his job got him transferred to a very remote village in the north, and so no colleges there, and so on and so forth. That's what led me to Swami. Everything about Swami was new to me. My parents were not devotees. None of my family members were devotees. So the concept of an avatar or incarnation or God on 2 feet, if you will, was a very, very new concept. But in the 15 years that I stayed, I had the brilliant opportunity to experience it firsthand. And at the end of 15 years and the end of 40 years now, having been associated with this brilliant phenomenon, as I call Swami, I begin to understand that putting any kind of label to this divine personality only limits our understanding of who he is. Whether we want to call him Brahman, Parabrahman, Paramatman, Kali Yuga Avatar, God himself, and all of those, they're still labels. Because all these labels are limited to our definition of what they would mean. Adi Shankara himself, one of the greatest enlightened souls that walk this earth, says, who am I to worship you? How do I even know who you are? So how can I even worship something even Harihara Birinchadi Pirapi, he says, Harihara and Brahman. So Narayana, Shiva and Brahman and Brahma and all of these, the trinities, even they have not understood you. Even they are putting their hands around your uniqueness, the omnipresence and the omnipotence of who you are. So who am I to even be able to say, I worship you? The way we can relate it for those of us who are in America is to go and stand at the bottom of the Niagara Falls. I don't know how many of you went to the hurricane deck. My wife and I are pretty adventurous, so every time we go there, we make it a point to go and stand there. The hurricane deck, which has a wind force of, I believe, hurricane 1 or 2, I guess, category 1 or 2 hurricane. Nevertheless, the idea there is when you stand there, there is, of course, the fun part of being soaked and experiencing that wind that is just caused by water. Excuse me. The wind that is caused by the water, that's the fun part of it. But then if you take a few more moments to go and experience that being there, you experience how insignificant you are. And in a fraction of a second, this mighty water can whisk you into nothingness. In a fraction of a second, you could be nothing. And that is just one of the 5 elements that we talk about. Just one of the 5 elements, water. And so it is if you go to the Grand Canyon and walk down to the depths of the Grand Canyon and look up and see you're 1.5 miles or so, I guess, don't quote me on that, into the earth. You see how insignificant you are. And the mighty earth towers above you and below you. It is the same thing with the wind, the same thing with space. The earth itself is a tiny, tiny fragment in this vast cosmos. Many, many years ago, I asked Swami in one of my first conversations to him, how do I conquer ego? And Swami said, what ego? Well, isn't that our main problem? So he said, where are you from? I said, I am from Bombay. Those days it was called Bombay. Now it's called Mumbai. So I said, Swami, Bombay. And he said, oh, Bombay. Where is Bombay? And I said, Swami, Bombay is in Maharashtra, a state. I thought he didn't know where it was. I was surprised, but nevertheless, I got a chance to interact with him, right? So I was more caught up in the fact that he was looking at me, talking to me, and I'm getting a chance to speak. So even though I was a little perplexed why he's asking where is Bombay, I mean, who doesn't know where Bombay is? Anyway, he said, where is Bombay? I said, Bombay is in a state called Maharashtra. Oh, acha, Maharashtra. Acha. And where is Maharashtra? Swami, in the western part of India. Oh, acha. Where is India? Now I realized he's not simply asking a geographical question. He's leading me onto something. Where is India? I said, India is in Asia. Oh, acha. Where is Asia? It's in Mother Earth. It's on Earth. It's in our planet. There are other 5 continents. Oh, okay. It's one of the 5 continents. Acha. Where is Earth? Swami, Earth is in the solar system, the galaxy, Milky Way. And where is that? In the universe. Is this the only universe? Swami, from what I have heard, there are many universes. And Swami took a deep breath. Okay. In these multiple universes, which has many dimensions, in that there is one dimension, the physical dimension. In that there is space. In that space which is infinite, there are so many galaxies. In that there is the Milky Way. In that Milky Way, there are millions of stars or billions of stars. And in all of that, you come down to the sun. And around the sun, which itself is a tiny fragment, you have 9 planets. And one of those planets is the Earth. In that Earth, there are 5 continents, 7 continents. And then in those 7 continents, there is Asia. In Asia, there is India. In India, there is Maharashtra. In Maharashtra, there is Bombay. And in Bombay, is there only one Sundar? No. There are millions of people. One among them is you. Where is the place for ego? He asked. Where is the place for ego? And he shook his head. He said, there is no place for ego. It is all in your imagination. That was one of my earliest aha moments with our beloved Swami. Not only did he give us an opportunity to be with him and sit at his feet, but this was how he poured this divine knowledge, universal knowledge that leads one to enlightenment. He dropped it onto our laps. very beautifully explaining. And in doing it in such a manner of a conversation, he truly brought our minds to a point of, wait a minute, in such vastness, why am I so bothered about I, me, and mine? Who is this I? It practically doesn't even exist. Even as you sit here in front of your screen watching this, around you, there are millions of microbial bacteria and other things that is floating around us, in us, right? If there was one bacteria asking you, excuse me, I've got some problems with ego. What do I do? What will be your answer to that bacteria? Like, you don't even exist. I don't even know. I can't even see you. Why are you so concerned about your ego? That is the fundamental opportunity or the fundamental problems, the way we look at it today. We feel the world revolves around us. Swami, take care of me. Swami will protect me. Swami will guide me. And Swami will take care of this. Why is not Swami doing this? Why is Swami testing me? Where is Swami's grace? And where is Swami God? How can I have faith? And how can I do this and that? Everything revolves around the I. And guess what? That I is of no consequence. No consequence. I say it is a great opportunity because this whole life is an opportunity for us to realize that in the ultimate analysis, what the I achieves, whether it is acquisition of material prosperity or acquisition of name and fame or popularity, acquisition of whatever it is that we want to acquire and add on, so we feel this I is growing, whatever it is. Think about all your favorites or want to do and the bucket list that you have to do things. Whatever it is really is of no consequence. What is of consequence then, you would ask? I ask this myself every day that I lived in Puttaparthi. I said, if the I is not so important, if the I doesn't even really exist, because it seems to be so small, so tiny, if you will, practically non-existence, then why is it that has so much importance? How does it gain so much importance? It is because we build that reality around it. We build it in our imagination. We have imagined this I to be so important. So what is of consequence then? What is of consequences? How I allow this I to merge into the universe. Sri Ramakrishna Paramahamsa gives a beautiful example of how, when Vivekananda asked him, how does one, or something like that, how does one realize God? Don't quote me again. I just remember the essence of these stories, not verbatim, so pardon me. He says, how does one know that one has realized God? Or how do I know I have realized God? And Sri Ramakrishna says, when the I will not be there, know that only God exists. And in order to explain that, he says very beautifully, if you take a salt doll made of salt, tie a string to it, and dip it into the ocean to measure the depths of the ocean, you think you'll be able to pull the string back and the salt doll will be intact to tell you how deep the ocean is? At some point, the salt doll will merge into the ocean. It doesn't come back. It becomes the ocean. The beauty of living with an enlightened teacher, with a phenomenon like Swami, endearing on the one side, loving on the one side, a strict parent on yet another side, a benevolent guru on yet another side, and this powerful being in yet another side. All of this changes one's life completely. In whatever transformation I have experienced in my life, I cannot take even an iota of credit. Not because I want to play the card of humility, it's just a matter of fact. I cannot take any credit. Because when you live in the presence of such a divine person, in the actual physical presence, not as a weekend retreat, not even a week-long retreat, or a month-long retreat, or a few months, when you take a sabbatical from work, I guess, and take a year off, or something like that. It was over 15 years. And so everything that happened in that 15 years was in the shadow, of being in the shadow of this divine person, this divine personality that we endearingly call Swami. Listening to him, talking to him, simply being in that aura, absorbing that divine energy of what he represented, learning from him. That's what caused transformation, if any. That transformation never stops, will never stop. The learning and the growth, I believe, and it's my experience, will never stop. From being in his presence, I grew to being in his fold. And so now, being in his fold for 40 plus years, I can say that the growth never stops, the transformation never stops. The salt doll is slowly merging into the ocean. So every time I say I am realized or I am transforming, guess what? There is still some more of that salt doll left. It's not fully merged, because once the salt doll merges into the ocean, then the question is, which is the I that is speaking? And that I will say, I have always been the ocean. We were sitting around Swami once, and one of us asked about, Swami, where does all this spirituality lead to? What is the point of the spirituality? Or something to that effect. Like I said, I don't remember the verbatim, but I remember the essence of these beautiful incidences. And Swami said, what is the end of spirituality? What is the end of spirituality? He wanted to gauge our understanding of what is all this. Because Swami would sit around and say, hey, no personal questions, only spiritual questions. And so we will, because he didn't want, young boys to start talking something personal in front of others and feel ashamed later on, right? So he didn't encourage us to ask any personal questions. He would always say, hey, no personal questions, ask something spiritual. Because he wanted us to engage in that kind of conversation. And so in that context, he said, so what is the end of spirituality? What do you think is the end of spirituality? And so he looked at each one of us and asked what Cheppandi, so one by one we raised our hands, and it was a small group, maybe 10, 15 boys. And somebody said, Swami, merging with the universe, not universe, merging with the Atman, becoming the Paramatman. Somebody said many such things, becoming the bigger I and becoming one with Brahman, understanding Ekoham Bahushyam. And each one of us, we are scholars, right? We become experts in textbooks. And so each one of us had a chance to demonstrate how much they knew. There was one boy who said, river merging into the ocean. Swami caught on to that. So river merging into the ocean, is that the end of spirituality? Who is river? Swami, we are all rivers. Who is the ocean? Swami, you are the ocean. Okay. So river merging into the ocean, pointing to us, river merging into the ocean, is that the end? And we were like, we just kept looking at him. But at least in my mind, I was thinking, duh. I mean, what else is that? I mean, you're merged into the ocean. That's the end of spirituality, correct? Again, going back to the salt doll analogy, the salt doll is merged into the ocean. So that's the end of the salt doll, right? What else is left now? So we perhaps nodded. That is the end of spirituality. We nodded. And Swami said, no, 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 no. That is not the end, sir. Very beautifully. That is not the end, sir. That is the beginning of spirituality. And we were like, wait a minute, what? That is the beginning of spirituality. Your little I merges into the bigger I. Then only you begin to live as the spirit, where there is no limitations, no conditions. When you become the Brahman, you begin to live the spiritual life. The stress is on begin. That is the beginning of spirituality. Everything else is going towards that beginning. You have not even started. That is such a powerful, powerful message that Swami gave me that day and us that day, that has stayed with me for the longest time. Because we are often caught up in me, my spiritual practice, and all of this has to go and end somewhere before I die. I don't want to come back again, and we want liberation as if we can wish it all away. The I itself has to go first. When the I is gone, then only you begin to taste. Why? Because then you begin to live as the ocean. As long as we believe in us being the river, however close we are to the ocean doesn't matter. We are still the river. I could be the Ganges as it begins its journey in the Himalayas, begins its journey as a river. Perhaps 1,000 miles away from the sea, it's still the river. As it comes closer down into the plains, flowing down gently, and it comes to the plains of India, Allahabad, and so on, and just goes towards the Bengal, and eventually merges into the sea. Just before merging 100 kilometers away, it is still the river. So whether it was 1,000 kilometers away or 100 kilometers away, a river is still a river as long as it's away from the ocean, different from the ocean. It's still the river. Maybe it's got a little colored, maybe it's got a little polluted, and so on and so forth, but nevertheless, the nature has not gone. It's still the river. So for us, those of us who say, I got this many years with Baba, and I got this many chances with Swami, I've been devotees for the last 4 decades and 6 decades and all of that, guess what? You're still the river. So until the very end, you're the river. And when the river merges into the ocean, it begins to taste the ocean. It is a completely different experience. Why? Because the river is sweet water, the ocean is salt water. The river has boundaries, the ocean has no boundaries. In an analogy, right? I know there are young children listening to it. They might say, wait a minute, there are oceans that are surrounded by land. Yes, I mean in a technical sense. So, but in an analogy, compared to the river, which is strictly has the boundaries on 2 sides, when it merges into the ocean, it is going from being conditioned, being bound by boundaries, into the ocean, which is boundaryless. The little I begins to merge into a completely different dimension of existence. And therefore the river transforms itself into the ocean. It was in these kind of moments that I began to understand when Swami would say, bring your mind to me. however grotesque, however dark, however confused, and there are a few more of those terms, but you get the point. Ridden, guilt-ridden, however condemned you think your mind is, bring it to me. It doesn't affect me, because he's talking from the consciousness of being the ocean. So the river merges into the ocean, the river becomes the ocean, and all of its little impurities merges, and the ocean has the capacity to take that in. The river transforms itself. It doesn't become a bigger river. It doesn't become a more popular river. It doesn't become a more rich river. It doesn't become a more healthy river. It stops being the river. It begins to live as the ocean. As devotees of Swami, we need to pause, ponder, meditate for weeks on end, if not months, on any one of such powerful teachings. In our quest for variety, in our quest for more and more programs, in our quest for more and more satsangs, in our quest for a change, in our addiction rather, to varieties and changes, we take pride in how many satsangs we attended. We take pride in how many bhajans we have sung. We take pride sometimes, and I know there are exceptions. We take pride in all of this, how many years we have been with Baba, how many books I have read, and how much of learning has gone through. But if we stop to take any one, that one teaching, such as this, powerful moments at his feet, this one teaching of the I merging into the ocean, being the beginning of spirituality. And what am I talking of being spiritual? I've not even gone and seen the ocean. Have I seen the ocean? Again, I'm referring to the analogy of the infinite nature of God. Have I seen? Have I even been close to that experience? How can I then describe this ocean as what it is? And when I become the ocean, then who is the one that's describing the ocean? Not me. The ocean speaks for itself. And the ocean speaks in the depths of silence. That is what Baba means by in the depths of silence, the voice of God can be heard. My dear sisters and brothers, it is a wonderful thing to listen to the Leelas of Bhagwan Sri Sathya Sai Baba. It is a wonderful thing to listen to others' experiences, others' stories. But far more important is that listening has to transform itself into absorption. Contemplation and then absorption. You listen, then you begin to contemplate, and then you begin to absorb. Bhagwan would call it Shravana, listening, which is the most powerful form of education. That is how Vedas were taught. That is how gurus taught. That is how Swami taught us. He didn't have a blackboard. He didn't have a PowerPoint projector. He didn't have, those days, having an overhead projector. For those of you in my generation, perhaps relate to an overhead projector. We thought it was a big deal. We had transparency sheets. We would write our points and project it on the wall as teachers in classrooms. So he didn't have those. He didn't have PowerPoint as we do now. And now in the last 2 years, everybody knows what Zoom is. So he had none of this. He just spoke to us and we listen. So Shravana is one of the most powerful ways of the first step towards self-transformation. So you listen. But listening alone is not enough. We get caught up in too many listenings. Because when it's time to contemplate on what we listened, it becomes a little less exciting, right? Now you have to contemplate, oh gosh, I don't have time for this. I'm caught up with everything else. So I don't have time for it. So when I don't contemplate on what I listen, then I don't have time to absorb it. I cannot absorb it because I've not had a chance to even say, all right, how does this make sense to me? That is what contemplation is. How did what I learned make sense to me? And I have to mindfully accept it or mindfully reject it or mindfully put it aside, saying, I'm not able to comprehend it at this point, so I will keep it aside for now. But after deep contemplation, or I will continue to contemplate till I begin to get inroads into what I heard just now. That's how powerful each of Swami's discourses were. That's how powerful each of conversations with him were. It gave us enough room, and he would give us time to contemplate. That's why I'm grateful he didn't speak to me every day. Because if he did, there's so many of those gems. It'll be like casting pearls to the swine. I would be like a swine not knowing which one should I even pick. And so he gave me a chance to contemplate. And I'm grateful for that. In that contemplation, you get inroads, you get insights. And when you get insights, you begin to get closer to that ocean. You begin to smell the ocean breeze. You begin to experience a little bit of that infinite nature. And your heart beats with excitement. And your soul begins to flutter because it's going back home. And so it is that when I contemplate, then I begin to get those inroads, and then it begins to absorb it into my self. What does that mean? Absorb it into my actions, absorb it into my thoughts. And that doesn't happen consciously, it happens at a very unconscious level. Because in that contemplation, I begin to accept my understanding of what I just heard. Respect your understanding. You don't have to project that understanding or project that you have understood to somebody else. You don't have to. You respect your lack of understanding, and that's okay. You respect your own understanding. Respect it. Accept who you are at this moment. Then whatever my understanding is speaks to my heart. It becomes part of me. And that expresses itself at a deeper unconscious level as through my actions, through my words, through my thoughts. Thus, transformation in spirituality is not necessarily a conscious effort. Yes, ethical values, you want to incorporate values in your self, in your family, you want to bring in ethical values in the society. That's all conscious, yes. But the true transformation is not a conscious act. It is a reflection of the extent of the absorption of the Vedantic truths that Swami came to teach us. And it is in that context that we have to take those steps. Because I firmly believe this, that the life and teachings of Swami will be a waste if you and I don't take those steps towards this transformation, towards incorporating those teachings in our lives. Yes, we talk of Rama. We compare Sai to Rama. I mean, say Sai Ram almost for everything. Rama was the embodiment of Dharma. When he and his brother had a difference of opinion through their stepmother and so on and so forth, he was about to be coronated as the king. And the eve of his coronation, he realizes, or he gets to hear from his stepmother, that his father changed his mind and the kingdom is now being given to his younger brother. Not only that, he should not just step aside, but leave the kingdom so that there are no complications. Just for a moment, we all perhaps have pictures of Rama in our home or idols of Rama in our home, and there are very few bhajans that don't have a Rama word in it, right? Just for a moment, put yourself in that shoes. For those of you who say, oh, that happened thousands of years ago, that's not applicable today. Yes, it is. Yes, it is. put yourself in that shoe and say, if I were to lose something, or if I were to, my values get tested, would I choose to go with the values and stick to the principle of something? Or do I go where I feel more convenient, more easy? And it is only those of us who believe in the supreme divinity of Bhagwan will stick to the principle of what our conscience says is right. We are given an opportunity almost every day in our lives, in different circumstances, in different avenues of life. We are given a choice to choose. What is the principle? Am I compromising on the very principle? And so, in order that the family stays united and stayed united, Rama chose to go to the forest, chose to give up his kingdom, chose to give up his status as being the prince. I know it sounds like a fairy tale, it may not apply to you, but are you and I, can we give up that status? Can we give up that position in our lives? Can we do that for the sake of the principle of obedience? My father said this. Wait a minute, your father is not right. It's not practical. It's just bizarre. But my father said it. And therefore, I will obey, said Rama. No, I'm not saying you should obey your father or things like that. Don't understand it in that context of that story. But I'm talking of how Rama stuck to the principle. The principle is at stake. So can I stick to the principle? So when we practice values in our lives, it is not for preaching, because they were so very dear to Swami. Satya, what is truth? You ask yourself, ask your children to define that. Tell them to write down a definition of truth at that age, whatever they think, let them write it down. You write it down yourself. You don't have to compare notes. You can if you will. And then you say, how am I going to implement this principle of truth in my life? What is peace? You define it. That is the freedom Bhagwan has given us. That is the beauty of the teachings, the essence of Swami's teachings, the essence of Sanatana Dharma is not being dogmatic. Please, allow me to repeat myself. The essence of Swami's teachings cannot become dogmatic. You cannot reduce it to dogmatic and say, this is what Swami meant by truth. This is the truth. This is Satya. This is Dharma. Follow Dharma. Ask yourself, what is Dharma? What is righteousness? Doesn't that change according to different contexts? Yes, it does. Doesn't it change according to who you are and what role you're playing? Yes, it does. Doesn't it change according to culture, according to times, according to the situation that's presented? Yes, it does. And therefore, each one of us has to find our own definition of these values. That is why in Krishna in Bhagavad Gita says, Swadharma, follow your Swadharma, your Dharma. What is your inner calling? Your inner calling. What is it? One of the greatest things that I learned from our beloved Swami is how he followed his inner call. And he never compromised on his principles. Never compromised on his principles. It didn't matter to him whether there were 5 devotees in front of him, or 50, or 50,000, or 500,000. It didn't matter to him. It did not matter to him. He never compromised on the principle of who he was. He never changed his ways because there were people criticizing him on his miracles or whatever it is. Right? Like every teacher faced more opposition than support, I guess. Jesus Christ only had 12 disciples during his time. Krishna was barely recognized anything beyond an administrator, a king, and in his time. And Rama was considered as an embodiment of righteousness in his time. And so was Swami. But when we analyze his life, when there was education being a business, which it still is today, he did not go about cursing the darkness. He did not start an activist movement, and he did not say, come on, let us all go against the government and stop this. Let us start doing this and that, and spread more of that darkness around. He said, let's light a candle. Let me set an example of how education should be run. How education is for life, education is not for a living. When medicine is still a business, largely, unfortunately, he did not ask us to stop medicines or take fight against pharmaceuticals and go against this whole idea of medicine being a business. He said, let me light a lamp rather than curse the darkness. Let me establish free medicine. A small lamp. A small lamp can light a whole room. A small lamp, which is well lit, can light 1,000 more lamps. But activism and activity caused in the darkness can never bring light, can only bring more confusion. And so in every act of his, he has given us a path. He is and he was a perfect role model, if you will, on how we can sanctify our lives, how we can live our lives, how we can broaden the horizon of our consciousness, how selflessness is actually the greatest self-empowerment tool, not selfishness. If we miss the opportunity of pondering on his teachings, studying his teachings, contemplating on his teachings, on his life and on his teachings, and we miss the greatest opportunity of absorbing a little bit of that into our own, so the transformation, the inner transformation begins to happen, and the river gets to move a little more closer to the sea, then we miss this divine opportunity brought to us by this most wonderful teacher, under whose umbrella of divine love you and I meet. So take time to contemplate on the teachings of Sai. Everything else falls in place. Then the essence of Sai becomes alive in you and me. And then we begin to experience Swami in our everyday life, in us, around us. Especially after Swami's physical passing away, it's possible we might have reduced him to, oh, Swami is watching us from somewhere up above. And we reduce this divine presence to a being that, oh, Swami, why are you angry with me? Why are you happy with me? Why are you testing me? How can I earn your grace? And we begin this limiting this concept of this divine ocean into just another big river. And we ascribe human emotions to this ocean. So it's like the river saying, oh, the ocean is not coming to me. The ocean is not answering to me. The ocean doesn't come to the river. The river has to merge into the ocean. Let us not reduce Swami to being in some dimension sitting and watching over you. It sounds nice. It's like a Santa Claus idea. It sounds nice. But the truth is, he's everywhere around, in and around you. He is the very essence of who you are, I am. And that very essence manifested in person, in human flesh and blood, to teach us how, without any education, without any of the so-called things that you and I need, or we think we need, without any of that, being born in one of the most remotest villages of India, he established a spiritual center, so that thousands of miles away and so many years after his physical demise, we are still talking about him. We celebrate his birthday. We celebrate the day he transitioned into the universal light. We celebrate the day that is dedicated to the teacher, the Guru Purnima. We celebrate every day, every weekend when we get together in His name and sing together. But let us not therefore just stop with these actions. We must be conscious not to make Sai Baba a spirit from some other dimension, but rather the very essence of who we are. We must not reduce Sai Baba to an event on the calendar. What is the next program? When is the next satsang? Where is the next Zoom meeting going on? And let me schedule that on my calendar. Then we add him to the 100 other gods that we already have on the altar. And then we sing, we compose songs, we compose poems, we do all of that. And generations will pass by, just like it did after Krishna, just like it did after Rama, just like it did after Jesus and Buddha. And as humankind, we remain the same, waiting for the next God to come by and somehow rescue us. Because we are not ready to give up, the river is waiting for the ocean to come to the river. The river has to go towards the ocean. We have to transform and slowly let go of this limited I. Life is not about what I can get out of it. Life is not about I, me, and mine. Life is about he, she, they, we. Life is about unity. Life is about oneness. I want to end this. I know I have only 5 minutes. 65th birthday, Swami gave us a chance to write this beautiful drama. And he told me, write a play which has got 100 boys on stage. And I said, okay, Swami. And he said the theme should be unity. And the way he spoke about it, it is so beautiful, so beautiful. Everything is unity. Everything is unity. And he chose to name the play, said unity is divinity. Because ultimately, it's just the ocean. We might say there is Atlantic Ocean and Pacific Ocean and the Bay of Bengal and this and that and the Arctic and the Antarctic and so on. But it is just one water. Look at the globe. One ocean. It's just one ocean. There is only one. That's my firm belief. That's the lesson I learned from Swami. There is only one. If I believe in that oneness, if I believe in that experience, then oneness results in my thought, in my word, in my deed. There is no other there. There is no he versus me. There is no she versus me. There is no he said that and she said that. It is just one. Can I, therefore, as a river, allow my little salt doll, can Sunder merge, therefore, into the Sai? Is the question I ask myself every day. When the little fears of this imagined Sundar comes up and says, wait a minute, how does Sundar pay this bill? How does Sundar take care of the family? How does Sundar do this? How does Sundar do that? Then let Sai take over. The Sai consciousness that orchestrates this universe, not in this just this one dimension that you and I know, even that is beyond our comprehension. If you want to look at space, we haven't gone how many light years. It begins, space and time begins to lose their meaning after a point, right? In theory of relativity and so on. But that is just one dimension. There are 7 such dimensions above this and 7 below. There are 14 dimensions like these, each one of its own infinite nature. So it's very difficult for us to even comprehend the extent of creation, the extent of the self that is still waiting to be explored. We have built a cage for ourselves, a little prison that we call the I, and we are living in that. We create the little gods in that, we create the little value system in that, and we say, oh, he and she and me and I, and we live there. We create our own little TV programs, our own little stuff, and we might call some good, some bad, some evil, whatever it is, it's all within that prison wall. Break. How do we break free from that? That should be the question. And each one of us has to find that path. And then we begin to taste this ocean which is, now I'm going to the spirit, which is, ocean is what we understand today in this dimension. But then if you go into that spirit, which is multi-dimensional, multifaceted, then that consciousness that orchestrates all of that, can it not take care of that Sunder? Really. 90% of the processes in your body and mind right now is automated. Are you consciously making sure your heart is beating? No. Right? So we say the subconscious mind, the part of the brain, and so on and so forth. We have kind of medically arrived at some kind of an understanding, if you will, to explain how 90% of the processes in our body are automated. I don't have to really consciously breathe. I thank God. I don't have to make sure the pulse is beating consciously. Thank God. Right? So that is just our body. But look around you. Look around nature. Look at the birds. Look at the stars. Look at the trees. Look at the seasonal cycles. Look at the universe that has existed for billions of years. It's almost impossible not to imagine there is an intelligence that is orchestrating the beauty of this creation. That intelligence to me is the Sai principle. That intelligence to me is the Brahman. That intelligence is the God. And that intelligence cannot be reduced to a spirit who gets angry with you or who decides to test you and all of that. So let us take the drama out and experience that universal intelligence. So when the little fear of this ego comes up, offer it to that universal intelligence and say, you take over. That was the essence of surrender. And so when that happens, then there is a great amount of self-empowerment comes. Because you know the universal intelligence is working through you. The Sai principle is working through you. And therefore, there is no room for fear. There is no room for doubt. There is no room for hesitation. And thus Swami says, why fear when I am here? I am here. Here. Tell yourself, here. I am here. The I is here. Everywhere, here. So when that I am here, there is no room for fear. Because that I am is taking care of not just this one dimension, the little you, but everything in this universe. So let us begin to bow in complete humility, in unconditional love and surrender to this infinite intelligence that has spoken to us through the name and form of Bhagwan, Sri Sathya Sai Baba. What a great honor it is to still be his contemporary, to have said that I saw him, I spoke to him, I still can listen to him and watch him on my iPad and my phone and my television. His words comfort me. His words enlighten me. Let us as Sai devotees, therefore, take steps towards that complete inner transformation. Let our hearts, our minds, and our souls begin to speak oneness, unity, love. Don't wait for the other person next to you to begin to take that one step towards unity. The person next to you is of no consequences to you. Don't wait for the government to bring about changes or some other organization to bring about changes or what says so-and-so is doing or what that one is doing. None of that is of consequence to you, because when you and I breathe our last, what is of consequence is what was the quality of my life. That determines the next stage. Have I taken one step closer to that ocean? And thus it was that in the principle of Godhead, our idea of what success is or what growth is very, very wrong. It is the principle of his. Like when Jesus spent his last 3 days in Jerusalem, his devotees, his disciples thought he's going to be crowned the Son of Man. That's what he told them. And he got crucified. Did that mean his mission failed? We know now it didn't. But at that moment, it seemed bizarre. It is the principle of teachings of such great masters that will continue to bless humankind for generations. You and I have this divine opportunity of incorporating those teachings. They are available to you and to me. Let us begin to focus on those teachings. Let us contemplate on those teachings. Let us begin to incorporate those teachings in our life. However incomplete they may be, however imperfect they may be, let us take those baby steps. It's time we took those steps. And when we take one step, there is absolutely no doubt that the universal Sai will take 1,000 steps and come towards us. Sai Ram, thank you very much for your patience. I believe we have some time for Q&A. So I'll offer the stage back to you, Sai Ram.